This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends.
Get back to your seats. Get back, gnashing teeth. Ooh, I want all of your mind.
Hello and welcome to Evangelical, a show exploring the world inside and outside the evangelical subculture. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. My guest this week is Stephanie Drury. Stephanie is best known for her website and Facebook group, Stuff Christian Culture Likes. On the blog, she uses sardonic wit to highlight the common, odd, and damaging trappings of evangelicalism, while also disarming them with humor. She's now the administrator of the Facebook group of the same name, where she's made space for people to express themselves honestly about, well, basically all of this. She's also a solid follow on Twitter and ran the fake Driscoll parody account of disgraced Mars Hill leader Mark Driscoll. We talk about her youth and the event that led up to her leaving evangelicalism, as well as the pain associated with church despite having a deep desire for connection. It's a great conversation. I've added links to all her outlets online in the show notes, and I encourage you to look her up. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at brchastain and the show across the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at exvangelicalpod. You can also find more on the website exvangelicalpodcast.com. Please rate and review the show on iTunes and tell others about the show. If they're religiously disaffected at all, particularly by Christianity, I'm sure they'll find an episode they can relate to. You can also contact the show via email at contact@exvangelicalpodcast.com. And finally, you can support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/exvangelicalpod. All right, let's get into it. Hey everybody, welcome back to Exvangelical. This week I have with me as my guest Stephanie Drury, who has been active on Twitter and online for a long time through her website, Stuff Christian Culture Likes, Twitter handle of the same, and also as Fake Driscoll. I'm really happy to have her and have a conversation with her. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we could make this work. So, generally, kind of how we sort of start things out is just talking about where you're from and what your background is. So, where did you grow up? What part of the state did you grow up in the States?
Yes, I did. I grew up in Arkansas mostly. I was born in Fort Collins, Colorado, because my parents are with the Navigators. Are you familiar with them?
I had a friend that at one point I worked at a Lifeway Christian bookstore, and I had a friend that his parents were part of the Navigators. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's it's a missionary organization that we were only in the States, but their headquarters is in Colorado Springs, and so I was born over there, and we lived in Oklahoma, and then I went to starting from third grade till when I graduated high school. It was in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I grew up. Then I finished college in Texas.
Okay.
But Nav kid is how.
So
and my dad's an ordained Southern Baptist pastor.
Okay.
So I just breathed all that from the moment of conception.
So I'm not really I'm not all that familiar with Navigators. I know that they can be active on college campuses. They do a lot of recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
But what are some of the hallmarks of the Navigators and as a group?
When I think of them, I just think, maybe this is my perspective, but I just think straight up American, North American evangelicalism, non-denominational, but kind of favoring Baptist and churches that have the word grace in the title, but they're kind of a sister group to Campus Crusade.
Oh, okay.
I think that they were both started by the same guy. We actually, the first dog my family had was named after Dawson Trotman, the founder of the Navigators. So it's, the more I look back on it, I'm like, oh my God. I didn't know what I was in, but did any of this, so.
Yeah. So you're a PK too. So.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So how is that? I'm married to a PK.
Okay, I am too.
So I hear different elements of what it was like to be a PK, but I know that there's, I'm sure, a lot of commonalities, but each family is different. So how did that dynamic sort of affect your family? Were you at church all the time, or?
We were only on, but I feel like we always were. We were always there on Sunday, but my best friend was Church of Christ, and she was there Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, and I felt like we were cooler because we didn't do all 3 days.
Yeah.
But my parents were having Bible studies at our house like every night of the week, basically. So,
Okay, like small
you
groups and
know,
all that stuff.
small groups, yeah, singing songs, and I thought that I felt like there was something important to, the predestination thing. It's kind of like, yeah, we're chosen. I remember having that kind of sense because that's what we were told is,
Hmm.
we're kind of not the chosen race at all because you wouldn't want to get down with Judaism, God forbid. So yeah, just that kind of cultish mentality of we're set aside, we're better essentially. We're in on something that no one else is. So
Yeah.
that was a definite thing growing up. I don't know if that's exclusive to being a PK or if all evangelicals or kind
I,
of grow up with that thinking.
yeah, I mean I went to a United Methodist church, but it was in small town Indiana. So like
Mhm.
there was some cultural things that had a lot of similarities within evangelicalism and everything like that. But yeah, that sort of sense of secure, I don't know, like eternal security. I don't know if you throw in
Mhm. Mhm.
some Christianese there. But did you attend public school, or did you go to a private Christian school or anything like that during elementary school or up to high school at all?
We were completely public school.
Oh, okay.
But our house had every Christmas, my dad would write "Happy Birthday, Jesus" on the roof and Christmas lights. And so I might as well have been in Christian school because everyone's like, "Oh, that's your fucking house." It was just the landmark, and they're like, "You guys are crazy." I'm like, "Okay."
So is this I'm sorry, what was the name of the town again? And
Fayetteville,
okay.
Arkansas.
So what's the
Yep.
size of Fayetteville like?
Um,
I'm pretty ignorant of the South. So as far as like the deep South.
no, I totally, I'm that way with all the states in the middle, like the ones that start with I. I have no idea, but they all run together for me. Fayetteville, when I lived there, was I want to say it was like 40 to 60,000, but the University of Arkansas is there, so
Okay.
it's college town. It was liberal,
Hmm.
and it was in the Bible Belt, so that was kind of a weird thing. And my parents, viewed this as being like a mission. It's like a liberal stomping ground, and we've got to direct these college kids in the right direction. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I grew up in Crawfordsville, Indiana, which is a small town, and that's a similar sort of thing. It's like maybe 16,000, but then it
Mhm.
has a this liberal, tiny little liberal school called Wabash. There, it's one of like three remaining all male colleges in the country.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Wow.
but it's like this tiny little holdout in a generally conservative place. So that dynamic, um, I feel like that sort of dynamic could be familiar for a lot of people that didn't grow up in like a suburb or a city.
Yeah.
That sort of experience. Um, did you have like a like an active youth group or that sort of thing at your church, or how did all of that, like youth group culture and all those sorts of things that are really formative for people, was that part of your upbringing too?
Yeah, well, I would for some reason I hated church and I really hated youth group. And I think I was scream and cry every Wednesday night. I was supposed to go to youth group and usually got out of it. But I remember one day, I think they coerced me or forced me somehow, and I showed up and I was just pissed. And Elizabeth Carnahan she went to Shiloh, the Christian school, and she patted me on the head. She's like, "We're glad you're here." And like I'll just always remember that as being like, ugh, how do you people do this? Like I just didn't, I wasn't down with the enthusiasm. And every Saturday night I'd start getting sick. I'd say, you know, oh, I can't make it to church in the morning. I feel too bad. And my parents were like, you do this every single Saturday night. So
Hmm.
it never worked. I always had to go.
Did
What
you
about you? Did you?
I was a very willing participant. I was just like
Okay.
very I don't know. and I was just very interested in sort of exploring
Hmm.
that part of life, and
Hmm.
I guess in high school. Um, but yeah, like there was a very active, like, and it was the late '90s, mid late '90s, and like there was a cultural moment. I remember it was on like on the cover of Newsweek once, like, like the Jesus Kids or something like that. And I'm sure it like covered like Cornerstone or something like that.
Oh yeah.
But and like that whole phenomenon. But for me, I was like on the youth worship team and all those sorts of like weird overachieving church kid sort of set.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that was that. I mean, I felt like I was earnest, but and I'm sure I was, but I was very much, I don't know, searching or whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
Um, for you, was there like a separate youth pastor in your church, or was it your dad leading the youth group too?
No, thank
Okay,
God it wasn't my dad. There
because
was
that
a
would be a
separate youth
whole other thing.
pastor. Okay, get this. Looking back on it, I'm like, that guy, his name was Ken, wish I could remember his last name, was our youth group leader. He married a really young girl. And at the time, it wasn't weird to me. And now I'm thinking, she was 19. Like, we knew that. And he married some 19-year-old and he was in his 30s. Like,
Oh my gosh.
so, and, at the time, we're like, yeah, cool. That's what you do, I guess. And you're a pastor, you get some young, pull some young, strange. I don't know. So that it's just like I was saying, these things are kind of falling together for me in the past few years. Like, oh, that was normal. I didn't know that was weird. So.
Right, right. Did in your house, did you have any sort of like media restrictions or anything going on, like only Carmen and Michael W.
I
Smith,
can I
or
still remember so many words to the oldest Carmen albums because my dad loved him. And there's some live album that I know all the banter in between all the songs and all
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And my mom would say, he is such a good guitar player. Which he was, I guess, right? But
And he knew how to wear some
there
shoulder
was
pads too, though. I mean,
oh yeah, the blazers and um my cousin, my dad's cousin, I should say, was in First Call. He was Marty McCall in First Call, and that was like the biggest deal because they sang backup for Sandy Patty. And
oh
so
wow.
whenever there's a Sandy Patty concert nearby, my parents were like, "Oh, we got to go." And I did meet Carmen once backstage, and yeah, I wish I could find the picture of that we got, but we were not allowed to watch anything other than PG movies, right? And I remember
Hmm.
renting Heather's. So I graduated graduated high school in '93. So I was in high school when Heather's had just come out, and I rented that so many times from Blockbuster, and my parents would get so mad each time and like not let me watch it. I just had to return it over and over without watching it because like, this is rated R. And that sort of thing. Like I'd hide tapes in my purse and like DJ Jazzy Jeff. I remember that one.
Oh yeah,
I had to hide
yeah.
in my purse, and I had like a Clash tape I had to hide. And you just think, and I remember I got the Alice in Chains Facelift CD. My mom was so pissed, like she didn't talk to me for like a whole day just by looking at the cover. So that
Yeah.
sort of thing. We weren't allowed to. The Princess Bride was great, except there's one line where he says "son of a bitch," and
Right.
that was like, oh, like the family's all nervous leading up to that scene, like, oh, he's going to say, I want my father back, you son of a bitch. And so that was just like the anxiety that was like coating the room. And,
Yeah.
when we were all watching this movie that otherwise was great by their standards.
Right.
That was interesting. I'm sure you had that dynamic too.
Yeah. My parents weren't like too, um, really too protective over media. Like, my parents grew up in southern Indiana, and like sort of independent Christian churches in rural Indiana.
Hmm.
Um, and so like as far as like media, they weren't totally protective. Like they, but
Hmm.
like we did. I mean, it didn't have to be PG, but there was a lot of just making sure you were sort of like the right age, I guess. I don't know. But I do remember like my sister was 5.5 years older than me.
Hmm.
So I remember listening to like a mixtape of Gin and Juice,
Yeah.
like in the church parking lot with her, and thinking that was amazing. And like, um, oh, well, there are definitely some other like events. Like there's one on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember. Somehow I was able to buy like the Coolio's Gangsta's Paradise. I
Wow.
I think it was just because the single was clean, but I got the whole album.
Oh
But
God.
I just had to be really careful of when when I played it, because
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. God
but
forbid.
yeah, for sure. Um, but again, like me being sort of like a willing participant, I ended up working in like a Christian bookstore in high school. That was
Hmm.
my part-time job. So I got really inculcated into that whole scene,
Yeah.
sort of on my
I,
own.
I don't want to make it sound like I didn't believe all this stuff because there was something about it that resonated for me, but
Sure.
I couldn't handle. So I wasn't one of these like secret atheists being like, I hate that, I hate my family.
Hmm.
I was kind of like, this is cheesy. Youth group is cheesy, and these rules about not listening to certain music are kind of dumb. But I get where they're coming from, so that's kind of where I was with it at the
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's yeah, I always think it's interesting to ask that question just because there are some people that it's sort of like you only had Christian stuff, like you were in that Christian bubble like entirely. And
Hmm.
then some people that just sort of like work it into their like media diet,
Hmm.
and sort of consume it in addition to other stuff. But I totally get that. I get like even going to youth group a lot of times, it's cheesy. It's weird. It's like you're a teen and these people are really trying to get to you and talk to you, but
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
They were just trying so hard. It's
yeah,
just like, oh God, like normal people don't do this, right? Because I had this element of being like, there's something off with how hard they're trying,
right,
and which is probably it's still the basis of stuff Christian culture likes. Is like, if you have to try this hard, maybe y'all need to ask yourselves some hard questions rather than thinking about the people you're trying to convert.
yeah, yeah. So what happens after high school? Do you go on to college? Do you go on to Christian college? What's next?
I went to the University of Arkansas for a year and a half, and I remember doing stuff with Campus Crusade there, and I transferred to Southwest Texas State University. I think it's called Texas State now, but I mean, there's state schools, but I was able to like kind of, I felt like I had to be involved with the Campus Crusade stuff, or have something there. Like I needed some tether because I was away from home, but that I'd been warned so much, like, oh, you got to be careful that the secular people won't lead you away, and so I just remember like that was when I first started kind of really dealing with depression.
Mm,
Is when I was holding those two things and really having to feel it all. Like I feel like I've been taught this one thing, but my intuition is telling me no. So that's kind of how college was for me with all that. And I wouldn't say I lost my faith at all, but everything was weird. Everything was kind of turned upside down during those years.
yeah. Um, I I went to a Christian college. I mentioned before we started recording, like I thought I wanted to be when I went into Christian college, I thought I was pursuing a ministry sort of angle. But
Mhm.
I remember like the people that were transfers, and thinking like, oh, they were at like a state school. What, did they party? Did they do these things that like
Yeah.
regular kids do? And like I didn't even know how to. I didn't. I couldn't sort of at the time. At least my first couple years into college, I couldn't really sort of envision what that would sort of look like because
Right.
yeah, like a Christian college can be a lot of ways like an extension of like a youth group, or
Oh
like
God, it's like one
it's
big sea of youth group with all the
yeah,
dorm rules and
right.
class rules and everything. Yeah.
So
Dress
for
codes.
yeah, yeah. So for you, being involved in this Campus Crusade stuff, was it what was the dynamic there? Did it feel like I don't like an us against them, or like you have to protect yourself from these things,
Yeah.
or
Well, yeah, they were into evangelizing, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. They wanted people to knock on doors, like, But I felt like, there's something. about being near people who, grew up in your own little culture,
Sure.
Christian culture. That's my first language. Dave Bazan always says that his language is evangelicalism.
Right.
He's like, he doesn't identify as a Christian anymore, but he's like that. Those are my people. So,
Yeah.
is that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's totally true. Like whatever your first sort of experience is, like yeah, that has a huge impact on your worldview, even if you step away from it.
Yeah.
Um, so you said that you started really dealing with depression at the same time. Um, was it this sort of feeling this you mentioned it was sort of like you were intuiting that there was a disconnect between the things that you were experiencing and basically trying to adhere to the what you were brought up, how you were brought up.
Right.
Um, how did that continue? How did that continue? Like, what beyond, in addition to the depression, was there like another way, or were there questions that started bugging you at the time in
Yeah.
college or afterwards?
Yeah. Um, I never drank in college because that's how I rebelled. I'm like, everyone drinks in college, especially PKs. So I'm not going to be that person. And that was my rebellious act. But I just remember like I had a couple of really bad breakups and not being able to get out of bed and being like, okay, God, you failed me. And I feel like I've been lied to by these Christians. And um, I remember I had a boyfriend who couldn't believe that I thought it was okay to be a Republican. And that was kind of because I'd been raised right with these in the Republican belt.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't anything I'd ever questioned so much, even though I did think at the time, I'm like, why are drugs illegal? Why is, pot especially bad? That I had these questions, but I didn't know how to name them. And so that was like a big conflict, I think, is, thinking about abortion from a new lens and things like that you just never thought twice about. Like, just realizing, oh, things aren't as black and white as I thought. This is scary. This is depressing. And so I think that's why I mean, I know it informs a lot of what I kind of want to encourage is to get away from the black and white thinking, because that's what fundamentalism is. It doesn't
Right.
allow for other perspectives or for compassion even.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's what I was dealing with, is I was kind of growing feelings for the first time. And so it was great. I mean, it was horrible and it was great. Like, it had to happen in order for me to be able to feel anything, I really
hmm
think is what was happening at the time.
Yeah. One of the sort of popular things that I've heard to sort of describe that experience, and I think Richard Rohr, who's a popular writer right now,
I
um,
love him.
yeah, I think he uses the terms like construction, deconstruction, and reconstruction,
Hmm.
which I kind of keep coming back to in these conversations, is because I feel like it resonates with sort of how I and several people who've walked similar paths have had to struggle and deconstruct evangelicalism, because it's something that you're in a system that you don't even realize is a system,
Right.
but then you start to feel the boundaries of it. Um, were there any classes or anything like that were like a catalyst, or was it just this broad? And that's a very general question,
Yeah.
but
Oh
or
yeah.
was it
No,
like,
I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember any classes, even though these were public schools. I just remember friends are who I remember, like conversations I had with people
mm-hmm,
or what I remember. So
right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For again at a Christian college, I'm sorry, I'm talking more about myself than I expected.
No,
Um,
it's good.
uh, at a Christian college, like someone like Pedro Liner and David Bazan, like he being very open about like his sorts of doubts and struggles was like a lifeline,
Yeah.
just because
No, definitely.
he was able to be vocal about it in a way that was very encouraging for this teenager or 20 something
Hmm.
who was not Republican, and there were college Republicans but not Democrats, and
Right.
and all that sort of stuff. But for you, after college, do you keep going to church? Do you keep kind of like trying to hammer away at these questions, or did you just
Yeah,
take a break or that sort of thing?
I did. I never really took a break, and because, and I think I've heard Pete Holmes say this, is like there's this hum in me that I was compelled towards what my version of spirituality was, and
Mm-hmm.
so I would go to these churches and have problems with them, but at the same time, I felt like the fact that I felt I was trying to connect to something,
Yeah.
and that's still how I would view it is, people are just going to church to try to connect, and people are,
Sure.
anything they do is just a bid for connection. So
Mm-hmm.
that, like we were saying, that was our lens at the time.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a giant break with evangelicalism until after I was married, and um, my parents disowned me. They disowned me and my brother and my sister. There's only three of us, and we each asked them to go to therapy with us, and they chose instead to, say, well, goodbye, rather than do that. And
Wow.
so that was, of course, extremely traumatic. Um, and that was probably where my questioning really came to the forefront. So that, that's an unusual thing. I understand now, very extreme, and would make you wonder, okay, everything about this God I was taught, how these people taught me about him, how can I adhere to this belief system? So yeah, that was my big break with evangelicalism.
Yeah, that I can see how. So, I mean, that is a complete. I'm sorry, I'm stammering because I'm still like absorbing that.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
uh, when when you experience something like that, I mean, that's got to be as you. I mean, there's no other word for it besides traumatic, right?
Yeah.
So you are you newly married? Is this at a time in your life when
Um,
um
let's see. No, we've been married almost, I want to say almost 10 years at this time.
oh wow.
Yeah. No, maybe like, let's see. My daughter was one. So let's see, what year was that? Yeah, it was almost 10 years, I think.
So
Um,
hmm. So
yeah.
you have your entire like you and your siblings have your entire familial structure just leveled.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, though, they were clued into it before I was. I was the one holding out, being like, "Oh, I can't accept this," and they were stronger and braver than I was. They really helped me with it, and it's been good to not have been. At least I wasn't one of us. Wasn't the only one disowned. Like we're able to talk to each other about it, and there's no singling out in that arena. But to have it's been a lifeline to have had two other people who have the same story.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So um you can decline to ask to answer this,
Okay.
but you just had a you just made a um general sort of plea to address something some sort of conflict. We don't have to go
Hmm.
into it, but there was something, just a general plea to agree to have professional help with this, and they just completely didn't want to
Yeah.
pursue. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. It was very, kind of like, um, oh, yeah. I won't go into details, but it
Sure,
was just,
yeah, I'm not going
yeah,
to ask you to
general
do that.
plea. And yeah. Oh
Um,
God, this is depressing for you, for all y'all. I'm okay with it because I processed it so much.
sure,
Um, I mean, I'm not okay with it, but
right.
I think it really informs the whole Christian culture thing because it forced me into therapy. It forced me to look at everything I was spinning out spiritually and emotionally, and dealing with, okay, if there's a God, is are they good? Are they real? And are they good? Like, um, I had to make a space to ask myself, is there a God, and are they good? That was
Mm,
my big thing. And I think what saved me, not just, my my spirituality or whatever, what saved my life probably was being able to have a space to ask that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I kind of want to do with Stuff Christian Culture Likes is give these people a space to ask just that question. Because we don't realize the fundamentals we're brought up in a lot of the time. We don't realize that there's another way to look at stuff, and if you experience things differently, it doesn't mean that you're wrong.
Right.
And that's what caused the crisis of faith, and that's what I think what causes a lot of emotional crises for people is thinking you're automatically wrong for having these different views and what they would call negative emotions about them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of shame for just even questioning or being angry at the system. So like Rohr says, you have to deconstruct in order to reconstruct. And so I just want it to be a space where people can be angry, because they haven't been able to do that ever. And I view Stuff Christian Culture Likes as a triage center, because I don't think people are meant to stay there forever.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just kind of get on there, vent, say whatever you want. I don't delete comments. I don't block anybody. I've only blocked like one person for saying that he was, making like really violent physical threats. But you can say whatever you want about God. I will not delete it. Like, that's important. You need to say what your thoughts are. And
right.
I think that's what saved me, is being able to just even have that space. So
Yeah,
that's kind of where all that comes from for me.
right. Yeah, and I think I absolutely agree. Like, having allowing yourself to be angry and honest, like anger being a permissible emotion.
Mm-hmm.
uh, one of the major critiques of evangelicalism that I am sort of levying throughout this whole deal is that it tries to prescribe a very specific way of life, and it's just not. If you fit into it, man, are you lucky? but
or are you?
yeah, I mean, you're lucky that you're not going to rock the boat or whatever.
Yeah.
But most people running, yeah, it's like at the end of the Truman Show, he hits the wall. Like,
Yeah. But the people who don't rock the boat are terrible people. Like they're not fun to be around. They're mean. They hurt my feelings all the time, and they have no compassion.
Right.
So I kind of look for the boat rockers, because they're who I feel safer with. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, I follow you on Twitter, and you definitely, you definitely get flack, and it's from those sorts of people. It's from those sorts of people that are offended that you have something to say.
Yeah.
Well, you praise him, then you thank him, till you reach the by and by. And I've won hundreds at the track, but I'm not betting on the afterlife. Then you kiss his lips, he forgives you for it, he forgives you for all you've done. But not me, I'm still angry. What have I done? Why am I always messing with?
Yeah, and I mean, because I get that it's scary to have your ideals questioned, and underneath that all is, why is that scary for you? Why are you afraid of that? Is this worth defending? Why are you having to defend it so hard? If you can't question it, is it a belief system worth subscribing to?
Right. So you have this like major inciting instant of this trauma that you go through, and it just throws you. Is there any way that you felt like you sort of when you were personally going through this trauma, was there anything in particular that that you started to question, or was it everything all at once? Was it, like the whole biblical narrative and all the different social things that you have to try to subscribe to be like accepted within evangelicalism, or was it just like the whole kit and caboodle was just thrown,
Yeah, luckily up till that point I had been questioning kind of social and political stuff. I had already abandoned conservative republicanism, like completely by that point, and that sort of thing. And I had gay friends, and my parents like, how did you meet them? That sort of thing. Oh, God, are they going to hurt your marriage? And but at that point, when the disowning happened, it was like, is God real? No, no way. Could he be real? Like that kind of thing is where I was. So
right.
Yeah. The pendulum swung, like Richard Rohr says, like it's always going to swing in one direction or the other.
Yeah.
So.
And is it around this time that you start to start the website, the website portion of Stuff Christian Culture Likes?
Yeah, I was on a road trip with my friends this was in 2008, because I remember the election was happening, and they go, how come Christians like John McCain? Because he's pro-war. And I'm like, oh, let me tell you all about that. Like evangelical Christians, hate abortion, but they love war. And so we were on this road trip, and I just got to explain all this stuff. And around that time, that book, Stuff White People Like, had come out.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, and then blogs were a thing. I'm like, oh, I could start a blog. And what should we call it? Stuff Christian Culture Likes, I guess, where, it started as something like, oh, this is everything. I know everything that Christian culture likes. And then it wasn't anything more than just, little stories and anecdotes about certain cultural and material things that evangelicals were into. And then I started the Twitter and the Facebook page, and people are climbing on, and there's all these huge discussions happening, and then fighting, and then people saying, oh, this group saved my life. And, so it kind of became a thing after that. So that was really nice to be like, oh, all this that I went through, maybe there's something that can come of it for some amount of good.
Yeah, and I mean it's really hilarious. I was reading through some of the the posts, and I absolutely I was looking at like the Ungame. Oh my gosh.
Oh, the Ungame. I still love the Ungame. I still always think about Worry Wharf and all those things that are on there.
Yeah. and things that edify, everything that has to be edified.
Everything's got to be edifying. God forbid something is unedifying.
Yeah. The mandatory chapel at Bible College, that was too real for me in particular.
I had my friend Photoshop like a turnstile in front of a chapel for that one.
Yeah.
I remember that one.
I'm actually going to read part of this because it's so good. There's a paragraph that says the chapel services themselves start with some introductory praise and worship led by one of the three hottest guys on campus and his pained expressions. He likes to look up at the vaulted ceiling and intermittently close his eyes while singing, and every straight girl in the building prays to be the future Mrs. Sexy Guitarist as a way to sublimate her lust. Which, since you mentioned you didn't go to Christian college, that is so on the nose you wouldn't believe. It's right on the money.
Yeah.
And as far as all the different things you have to do to make up chapel skips and everything, that's also on the money. At our school we had to listen to 2 chapel tapes, actual cassette tapes that we had to get from the library basement and write a summary of the message.
It's like they don't realize that this is how you set people up to hate the institution. It's like they don't know, I guess. It's so wrong. It's so fucking wrong.
It was it was really bad. And senior year I had heard that you didn't really have to go, what are they going to do? Put a mark on your transcript? But then so I didn't go to chapel at all senior year. But then I had turns out you kind of had to. So I had 22 additional skips. So that meant 44 tapes. And I got 2, somehow I found, this was early 2000s. MP3s were already a thing. But I somehow found 2 boomboxes and listened to 2 tapes at a time.
Oh my God. In tandem?
Yeah.
Okay, because you obviously couldn't pay attention to both at the same time. So this was the legalism rearing its head, right? It's forcing you to do something completely nonsensical, but letter of the law instead of spirit of the law.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was yeah, it was something. But anyways, yeah,
That's hilarious.
yeah, that post, and then yeah, the Dave Ramsey one, and
Ugh. Did you
Dave
ever
Ramsey.
read what happened with him? Did you read the Matthew Paul Turner wrote a piece on on Dave Ramsey's anger problem? You have to Google it. It's insane. He like went insane in these meetings and in staff meetings and waved guns around and like
Oh, I remember that now.
everyone
Yeah.
has to listen to this
Oh my
because
gosh.
that guy is off his rocker. But go ahead.
Yeah. Oh no. I just remember reading. I do remember hearing stories. I didn't know it was Matthew Paul Turner though. Um. Yeah. He's definitely unstable.
Ugh.
um. Yeah. You had a line in there that Dave Ramsey was like Susie Orman, but 100% less lesbianic, which made him more.
I don't know if I would say that word now, Like,
Yeah.
there's these things that I go back and I'm like, oh God, what else am I gonna be embarrassed about 10 years down the road that I did online? But
Yeah, that's our world now, though. So you just
right.
have to accept that present you is wiser than
Let's
than
hope
past you.
so. Yeah. Mm.
So yeah, you mentioned that this sort of expanded from the blog and then kind of moved over to Twitter, and then you're in the Seattle area now, right? Is that
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
live? So you were in the actual area where the whole Mars Hill phenomenon happened, and
Yeah, I kind of had a front seat to that because when I was going through my therapy stuff around the time of my initial major trauma, I was meeting women who were also going to therapy, and they were members of Mars Hill, and they were in full on breakdown mode, like they would be shaking. And it was frightening because they had young children, and the stories they all had the same story. They attended this great church, Mars Hills, great church, really cool. Pastor's great. The music was awesome. It was a great church. That's like all they would say about it. And still the cult thing hadn't caught on. No one would entertain that notion yet. But I was so concerned because they said that they met someone, they got, were pressured to get married. Of course, evangelicals get married young, like me, right? So they got married. Then the women were all pressured to quit their jobs and have kids. Just they're supposed to breed, and so they did that. And they had a lot of them had degrees, and they weren't coping well with not working,
yeah,
and maybe they weren't supposed to be mothers yet or at all, but this was the pressure. And so they were, experiencing, suicidal ideation, all
oh my
kinds of,
God,
it's intense. And this is the treatment that they were getting from Mars Hill. They were told you cannot go to any outside counseling that isn't under Mars Hill's specifications, they're lay pastors, right? Crappy, unqualified, I'm sure. And even if they are qualified, there's all kinds of Christian counseling out there that's bad. There's some that's good, but come on, there's a lot that's like, don't question anything. So they were only allowed to have the specific Mars Hill counselors, and they were told to pray harder and submit more to their husbands. And so I saw this just tearing at these families. It was, and the kids, I just felt so sorry for the kids to watch their moms in meltdown mode like that. Like, what does that do to you? What does that do to the woman? And the husband is supposed to be like, well, I'm the backbone of this, and she's acting crazy. So, I mean, the misogyny was unreal. And that's when I first started really waking up to it. And so on my commute, I started listening to these Mark Driscoll sermons and being like, fuck this guy. And, I couldn't believe that people were putting up with it. And yet I had compassion for it because I'm like, well, I don't know if I would have been able to see if I hadn't had this distance from it, So I started the fake Driscoll Twitter just on my commute to and from work, and just because I felt like I got to know his voice kind of well. So I just tweet things that I figured he'd say, like tomorrow's Grace's weigh-in, would really appreciate your prayers. I've had her hitting the treadmill pretty hard, so we'll be pretty happy with the number on the scale, but would appreciate your prayers, guys. And people are like, oh my God, I can't believe that he didn't say that, because that sounds like something he would say, So that was kind of a fun way to get it out of my system. But immediately Mars Hill was really mad. Like they had their attorney send some kind of email full of, legal terms and telling me this is basically what it said. You're allowed to have this Twitter account, but you have to be completely clear that this is not Mark Driscoll or affiliated with us. And I'm like, all right, that's my Twitter bio now. So it's still my Twitter bio, all that, if you want to go look at it. But that was really scary to see that. It's like people that are suffering under the system, and it's like, how do you get cult members out of a cult? I don't know if you're watching the Leah Remini Scientology thing on A&E, but it's just completely a parallel.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
Marcellin.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the Chicago area, so my wife and I, we also got married young. Didn't mention that earlier, but
I figured.
Safe assumption. Yeah, it became a national story. This all these things happening at Mars Hill. And even if you sort of followed, even if you only read something like Christianity Today, like it was being covered a lot, but it wasn't being covered until like shit hit the fan, really, which was later, and which was from really from the plagiarism scandal, and
that was freaking hilarious, all that plagiarism stuff, and
him
buying up all his books, like L. Ron Hubbard, like I'm gonna buy these all with the tithes in order to get on the bestseller list for God's glory, not my own. But
but this was the sorts of things you were experiencing were even years earlier. So how long was Mars Hill sort of present or active in the Seattle area?
When we first moved here in 99, it was one of the churches that you heard about immediately. Like, there's this cool new church. It's really cool. It's great. You got to go see it. The pastor's awesome. And it met in a venue, and it was so impressed with itself that I was like, kind of right off the bat, because it reminded me of youth group, like the West Coast flavor youth group. But but I did go to one whole entire sermon in like about 2000 or something, and Mark talked for about an hour, and all I remember is him talking, like trying to make himself look really cool. He's like, yeah, I like a good wine. Like, he talked about wine for a while, and I'm just like, oh, it was so bougie, but everyone was just enraptured and clapping and laughing like he was the best thing. And then he said, the wife needs to have sex with the lights on if that's what the husband wants. And I'm kind of looking around going, oh my God, how many sexual abuse survivors are in the audience right now, just statistically speaking? And how much shame and damage is that going to reenact on them right now, just hearing that, like being guilted into something? So that's when my ears first pricked up. But, people weren't having it. Like, my friends who still went there, were very defensive of it. And that's a great church, and you shouldn't have a problem with him. So it was as early as about 98 or 99, I think it started.
So it'd been there over like 10 years by the time it flared up and died out. But these women were they were experiencing it from the top down, right? I mean, this was sort of this was the way it was structured. There was a heavy complementarianism is the
nice. They think it sounds so nice to say complementarianism, like as if they complement each other, as if there isn't like an indentured servitude element going on. So these women are all like, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is God's role for me. I'm going to stay home and have these babies, and he'll earn the money, and I'll obey him. And that's just how they all were. I knew so many of them. So
we were ousted from a community church for being egalitarian. So
tell me about that real quick if you want to.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we, my wife and I, like we come from these traditions that are actually egalitarian. So, like I grew up United Methodist, and United Methodist has for a long time ordained women. The first pastor I remember was a woman.
Oh, nice.
So I don't have any sort of gender association with it. The Wesleyan Church also, which is my wife's background, is the college we went to.
Yeah, I mean, that's Methodist, right?
Yeah, it's like it's a go into church history corner for a second. They split what became the United Methodists and what became the Wesleyans split over slavery in the 19th century. The Wesleyans were on the right side of history, so they were abolitionists. But then over time, the Wesleyans became more socially conservative. So they definitely like espouse egalitarianism, but it's not really a it's just not generally practiced. There's many more male pastors than female in that particular denomination. So fast forward, like, I don't know, like 2009, we start attending like a storefront church that our friends go to. And
what do you mean by storefront?
Like,
real quick,
literally, like in a city meets in a storefront.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, really tiny.
Like a drug ring, like a crack front operation.
Technically, it was a community center, but it's on either side was like it was a storefront size. It was not, you know, it was not like on one side it was a pizzeria, and on another one was like I don't know, some other store that probably became 2 or 3 things over time. Anyways, we're very involved. It's a very small church, less than 100 people. There's like a pastoral sort of change, and then our friends. So there was a pastor that was like Moody Bible educated. So it was already conservative, very close to fundamentalist anyways. And then had no actual oversight. The elders just, there was no denominational oversight, anything like that. The pastor that was Moody Bible educated left because he had like a family. His dad almost died, and then like that just sort of changed his perspective on things. So he just had a new phase in life. And our friends, our friends, like close friends, one of them became the lead pastor, and he had never been to seminary. He had never been a pastor.
Oh no.
And then like we tell them in private, like we were on the worship team, we were, you know, we were heavily involved. And we tell them, look, we're egalitarian, and we have a daughter, so it was like, we're not going to teach our daughter that she's any less than anyone else. And I'm not gonna have that shit. Like, like we both had that perspective. My wife and I. And then we tell them in private. They say essentially, okay, well, you can leave. We're not going to force you. We're not going to like fight for you to stay. Then like 2 older, they're our age. And then like 2 older couples kind of step in, say, let's meet once a month for a year. And like just have a longer conversation. Please stay. Like, and that was why we stayed. We stayed.
That sounds nice.
Yeah.
Did that feel nice, or am I hearing that right?
No, it felt great. It was like, and that was why we loved the place, even though we disagreed theologically. Like the people there were amazing, and it was.
They wanted to hear you, is what it sounds like.
So one of them, you know, was these 2 older couples, like, were set up to mediate essentially. So we meet, and this is at the very beginning of the year. So we meet in January. We have a kind of heated discussion. They drag their feet, and we don't meet in February, the other couple. And then in March, like, as we're walking in, the husband, as we're walking in to one of these, like, other couples' homes to talk about this, it feels like he's about, like, to, like, break up with someone, you know, like, you know, when, like, someone's, like, sort of dragging their feet, or they're, like, you know, acting all sullen, you can feel it in his body. And then he basically just is like, I'm not going to have this conversation. I feel persecuted. It's like, dude, you're like, you're the one in charge.
White male straight white pastors who are male are the most like reluctant to do that sort of thing. Would you agree? I've just never encountered anything quite like that. They're like, I'm being persecuted right now, when you're just trying to have a conversation.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it wasn't like anything. I mean, it was us, you know, it was us disagreeing about Paul's pastoral letters, you know? It's like, come on.
And he's like, I'm being personally persecuted, and I'm not going to have this.
Right.
Am I right? Is that what he was saying?
Essentially. And so it was and it was really hard. And then like it was a very it was very it was hard because eventually some fallout from that, like we lost a significant part of our support network in our neighborhood, like in
Oh God.
so it was definitely like it was traumatic for sure.
Yeah.
I don't want to I don't really even know how to sort of talk through it or like describe or
Sure.
like ascribe a word to it. But but anyways, it was over egalitarianism. It was like
Yeah.
you're not
Yeah.
you're who are you to say my daughter or any other woman is like inherently less than you. So like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
back off. Like you're not going to say that, and you're not going to ascribe that to God. Like that's nope.
Good.
You can't do that. So
Good for you.
anyways, sorry to
That's
I
great.
get
No, I'm just
no,
so glad to hear that there are people like you that will take a stand, especially for your children. A lot of people won't do that because it costs them socially. That's so painful to face the realization that these people will abandon you over that issue, over the issue of equality. Like there's nothing more painful than that.
right.
There really isn't.
No,
And so the
yeah,
fact that you did that, you just gave your daughter and each other just a massive gift, even though it hurts a lot. It's
yeah.
because you faced reality, and that's really good.
Yeah, and I mean, and it was definitely a joint effort with my wife and I. So
Good.
like it was definitely like um I don't want to she's not on mic. So I'm like I'm going to have to
Are
speak
you
for her right
mansplaining for her? I'm just kidding.
now.
I'm totally kidding.
Yeah. So
You're not.
anyways,
I can tell you're not a mansplainer in the least. So
um so yeah, that sort of yeah, environment um it happens on scales like very like this is very small. It's not, it's not Mars Hill. It doesn't have like the organizational heft
hmm
as something like Mars Hill, but these
hmm
Mars Hill is like seen as the beacon for smaller places like this. And
yeah,
so it's, it's there someone like Mark Driscoll. He's got all this like success. He's got a huge church. What's he doing? And so that sort of toxic version of things is it spreads. Like
oh yeah,
it spreads, and it's
it sure does.
yeah. And that's why uh efforts like stuff Christian culture likes is essential for people that are sort of on the other side of that, because
Yeah,
I do think that there is like everybody is sort of in a different place in their journey, and like if they do find a way outside the subculture, then it's there's got to be a place of transition, like you said, like a triage place, um and that's essential to process. And I think like what you do in the group and what you do like on Twitter too, like I like all those things are like useful and also hilarious. Like I love your sense of humor. I love the way you like on Sundays will like take on people like through or like highlight people that are talking about rock and worship and like retweet
oh
them, or
yeah.
on Fridays talk about date night with my hot wife.
Oh
Like,
God, I just like they don't. It's just such a cultural thing. It's like they're like, what's wrong with that? What is wrong with this? And I guess the rock and worship, there's nothing like really wrong with it. It's just so cheesy. But the thing with the date night is that's the thing about the hot wife and also the daddy daughter dates. Dear God, don't get me started. Like it's called parenting. Don't use the word date with that. And they don't see how they're sexualizing their daughters. They
Right.
really don't. So all I do is like try to just retweet that stuff and like, yeah, why do you have to qualify your wife as hot? Why do you have to put a picture of her? Why don't if I search date night hot wife, there are hundreds of tweets about that, but there's no like sensitive, caring, smart, brilliant, funny wife. Like there's nothing that has anything to do with her character.
Hmm.
It's a total thing. So I mean, I'm sure my point is lost on a lot of people, and I know they think I'm a giant bitch, most of them, but that's another interesting thing is if I use a male pseudonym, which I've done as an experiment, it's like they do a 180. Like I'm heard, they're like, "Oh, good point, man. Okay, I see what you mean, bro.
Can you
All
give a
right,
specific
yeah."
example of that? Because I think that's really interesting.
Okay, here's my thing with my, and I feel bad that I don't give anyone any idea about what my pseudonym's name is, but I really think it would ruin the experiment.
Sure. Yeah, no. Yeah, absolutely.
It's
I get
also
that.
more to like get other people, if I talk about it, other people will be like, well, I want to try that for myself, because I don't think it's not, it's so powerful to see it happen for yourself, like tweet what you would as your own self and then tweet it under the another gender's, the guise of another gender, and you will just, it's insane how differently they react to you, or in any conversations on comment threads. It's, every time, I'll say something as myself and they're like, yeah, you're on your soapbox again. Oh yeah, whatever, blah, blah, blah. There's Stephanie. But then if I say it as a dude, that they do not argue with me. They're like, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Okay, bro. Okay, man. It's so interesting. And I mean, I say interesting. It's fucking depressing. It's the worst. I mean, I hate that I'm raising a daughter in this world. So I have to, I have to make it better for her in some
Yeah.
way. But, I would just, to use the Christianese, I would really challenge you guys to make an account of another name. So. But I get it, like with because I don't feel like I'm completely outside the church now. I have we made big breaks with two churches we were really involved in here a few years ago, and maybe about 7 years. A church that we had been at for a really long time. They fired the worship pastor just because they had a vision plan change, and they put him and his family, on the street. Like they're like, it was seriously like F you guys, and it was insane. This was a Presbyterian church, like a PCA church, and I sat in front of the board of elders like 4 or 5 times, and I'm just like this weeping woman going like, how can you do this to this family? And they're just these 8 or 9 dudes, because it's PCA, right? And they like just flat expressions like, Stephanie, your intuition is wrong. And they told me that. They said that to my face, and that's when I first was like, holy shit, the sexism thing people talk about is real. And my husband was there, and would reiterate what I had said, and they looked to him with interest, like, oh, okay, I see what you're saying, David. And I'm like, I was just saying that just now. And they're like, yeah, but you're hysterical and you're crying, is kind of the sense that
Ugh.
the vibe I was getting, for sure. So we found another really small church that we were really into, and it had all the it identified as progressive, women on staff and all that. I was really into it, but there was kind of this underlying thing where I just didn't feel quite right with the pastor. I felt like he was intimidated by me in a way, and and women in general, not just me, but strong women, or kind of, he just, there's like a cagey element, and the way that the other women kind of bowed to him, that we're like, oh, that's okay if he wants to do it that way. I'm like, I just wasn't really okay with that. And then and I remember I kind of set an intention, and I asked for it to be revealed to me if there's anything that I needed to be woken up to. And the next Sunday, he in church, he said something that just was so sexist. It read as so sexist to me that I raised my hand like, can you say what you meant by that? And I felt completely stiff-armed, and he wasn't going to talk about it, and I just left. I like had to leave. I felt sick, and I haven't been back in that building.
Hmm.
And it was, it was a big deal. I was teaching Sunday school. We were super involved, and so just talk about the community kind of dropping out from under you.
Yeah.
But I realized I can't raise my kids in a church where the pastor is afraid of their mother, because she won't be any less than because I wouldn't make myself smaller for him. I was going to be a whole person.
Right.
And I'm just like, this is the culture. As much as they want to be progressive, they're not there yet, or I don't feel they're there yet. So that was just another kind of stand. That was traumatic too. So I just don't know if I can be part of a church again ever.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm not an atheist. That's where I am right now, is just all the trauma around it. I just don't know how people can let themselves do that.
And it's true. Yeah, it's just again, like just thinking through your story, thinking through other stories I've heard, like it makes me like pause, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
because it like the sort of purpose of church is to like provide people with comfort in a lot of ways. I mean, sure,
Mm-hmm.
you can challenge them, to um to live out life like Christ. You can, but I mean, what it should come down to is, it showing God's love to people, period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like, and stories like that, it becomes about power, it becomes about authority, it becomes about will and control. And when all those things enter into the picture, everything gets all screwed up. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so you said that you're not really atheist. You're not really at that point. You had mentioned that like um, you mentioned that you're familiar with Richard Rohr,
Mm-hmm.
and like you also mentioned Pete Holmes, who I'm a big fan of. I love his podcast,
Mm-hmm.
just because he gets people to sort of talk honestly about where they are, and that's to me that's the most important thing for anyone that listens to this show that is um, somewhere in wherever they are in their experience with dealing with big questions. I think honesty is always the best sort of policy,
Mm-hmm.
because, I mean, you as a person know where you are. Like you can intuit like where you are, and if you're trying to fit into something that doesn't fit you, then that creates an extra sort of pain or trauma. And so,
Yeah.
any idea that I have of God right now is um, that God can handle it. God can handle,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that word refers to. It can manage a human being honest with themselves. um,
Yeah.
so for you, what's that? I mean, you're not like really ready or willing or able to go to a church building, but you're still you've got this hum in you. You mentioned. How's that
Yeah.
sort of how's that for you right now? What's
What
that mean for you?
what's interesting is I go to Catholic churches all the time, like pretty much every day. I I'm really drawn to the tabernacle, and where they keep the host in there, and I don't think I could ever convert to Catholicism because of their stance on women and gays, but there is something about that tabernacle, so I'll go almost every day. I'm just drawn to it, and I feel better when I'm near it. So I can't rule out any, mystical stuff for myself. I've had things happen that I can't describe, and they aren't rational. So
Mm-hmm.
it definitely falls outside the dualistic categories, I guess, where at the same time I will defend so hard anyone's right to be an atheist, because
Sure.
all that is their experience. They're acting out their experience. I have to act out of my experience, and if everyone did that with respect, then there wouldn't be any of this clash. If you could just make some space for that's how it is for them, it also wouldn't allow for abuse. When I say that, a lot of people say, oh, that means you could abuse someone and it would be okay. I'm like, no, because what you're doing is you're respecting their experience. There's no abuse in that at all. You're just allowing the coexistence. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's another thing. People will ask me a lot, are you a Christian? And I hate that question. I hate it. I hate answering it. I hate trying to answer it because I feel like they want to put me in a box. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say, why do you want to know that? Why do you want to know if I am? And also my baggage with Christianity is that the kind of reputation it has is it thinks it's better than everything else. It thinks it's the answer. And I could never say that it is right over Judaism or Hinduism or Buddhism, like all that stuff. I think it all goes back to the same place, which clinically probably makes me a heretic, but I whatever. That's all that matters, is that people are acting out of their own experience and they aren't shamed for it.
Sure.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of religion is just geography too. It just happens to be where
totally. Well, and
where you were
Rohr
born.
says if I grew up in Israel, I would be a Jew. If I grew up in India, I'd be a Hindu,
Yeah,
definitely. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think there's a yeah, I totally I'm in what's the phrase I've heard, like in like rousing agreement with you. Like
Mhm.
people are living out their experience, and it's um and the thing that people benefit from the most is hearing other people's experience and being
Mhm.
not invalidating someone else's experience is like crucial to be able to learn from another person. Um and yeah, and there's a lot of reasons why. There's a lot of very valid reasons um, to sort of chafe against the term Christian, and
Yeah.
certainly evangelical, especially with the election outcome. I mean, a lot of people are thrown into crises of faith because of the politicization of their religion, and like the war in Iraq did that for me. Like
Mm,
that was the crisis. That was one of the elements of crisis. Was
really?
yeah. It was like at the same time, like I didn't believe it was a just war. So like, why are all these Christians being Republican and supporting it? But
Yep. At the same time, saying abortion is wrong.
right. But that was just part of where I was in history and like my experience, and it's hard to say that's invalid, or that someone else that's in evangelicalism right now, like if they're not denouncing someone else, it's hard to say that that's not valid either.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, we weren't taught that there could be space for both at
right.
all, because
Hmm.
dissent was a big threat,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be. Dissent
Right.
is healthy. Dissent is smart. Dissent is scientific. Dissent is emotionally whole. So.
Hmm. And that's why places like that you're doing with is it on, it's a Facebook group, correct? So it's
Hmm.
there that people can come and just be open
Yeah.
and just
Yeah, I post stuff like, scandals. I have Youth Pastor Watch, where there's all these youth pastors getting arrested for doing horrible things. It's kind of like holding up this stuff and being, okay, we can safely criticize this stuff here. What does this say about the culture? What does this say about spirituality? So,
hmm.
yeah.
I'm glad that you're at a place where you can just getting to know you a little bit through this conversation. I'm glad you're at a place where you feel like you've given yourself space, and I applaud you for doing your part in creating that space for other people, because I think that is absolutely I feel like it's absolutely essential, um and yeah, I just absolutely just applaud you for doing that, because there are many people out there that just like those women that were being abused in that system,
Hmm.
and they need spaces like that. Um,
Hmm.
so where can people find you? Where can they find the different things that you're up to online or elsewhere?
Oh, it's basically the Facebook page. The Facebook address is at Stuff Christian Culture Likes. I haven't written anything in the blog for like 3 years, but that's all still there, for better or worse.
Yeah, and it's evergreen content, to use a marketing term, because
Oh, what does
the-
that mean? I don't even know what that means.
it's just sorry, I'm that's my day job, but
No, that's
it
good.
just means that it's something that can be used all the time, so
Oh, nice.
because it's
Okay, all
always
right.
relevant, and
Oh,
so
thanks.
honestly,
Haha, relevant.
uh, evangelicalism doesn't change that much, so
You know what? You're
so
right. I'm
so yeah,
confused.
that stuff about Dave Ramsey and scheduling sex and the ungame and
God.
all those
Oh,
things are
God.
still true.
Oh. Ah. Makes me feel like I'm covered in itching powder, like stop, think about that. But I'm probably on Twitter kind of as much as Facebook, so that's at Stuff CC Likes, and that's kind of all I've got going on that front. So
Well, thank you, Stephanie, so much for coming on.
Of course.
I'm really happy that that we'll get to share this and to use a little bit of Christianese to encourage some other people.
I just want to encourage you now to.
Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Reach out, touch faith.